Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this. Try to keep it in frame here. A Remington 870 Express, chambered in 12 gauge. Now, long-time viewers of the channel might know, Murph, you've already done a Remington 870 review here on the channel. That was with the Remington 870 Wingmaster, which this shotgun was featured in because there are some differences between the Express and the Wingmaster. If you're interested in a review on an 870 Wingmaster, go ahead and check out the link in the description to the original video. This is going to be talking about this particular shotgun because it is technically a different model, so ergo, it will get its own video. With that, why don't we go ahead and get into the background of this particular shotgun. The Remington 870 Express was considered to be the kind of budget offering of the Winchester catalog, which is kind of surprising once we get into features since we talk about some different aspects of this particular gun. So the Wingmaster is supposed to be the more polished, collectible, or better looking option, and then this is the everyman's gun that's supposed to be sold at like big box stores like Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods when they still sold guns, all those kinds of places. Something that is meant to just be rugged, reliable, and ready for the average man. And you'll be able to get these in a variety of combinations. You could pick these up with like a slug barrel along with them at different times for, you know, different sales and all those types of things. Now, Remington as a company is very interesting because in the last couple of years, they have gone from the oldest firearms manufacturer in the United States to a bottom tier brand. And you can kind of trace that through, or at least I can personally trace that through the 870 Express. So Remington will be picked up by the Freedom Arms Group, which would also include other notable manufacturers like Bushmaster and Marlin. For some reason, I'm really struggling with the manufacturers' names today, as well as Marlin. And we would see an immediate drop in the quality control of all these manufacturers. There would be an issue with the fit and finish of Remington and Marlin products, and I mean, Bushmaster would just go downhill super fast, which there's some conversation as to how good of a rifle Bushmaster is put together to begin with, but they're definitely nostalgic. They were definitely very early in the game of the AR-15 and making it more available to the average person. Regardless, I remember my dad picked up a Remington 870 Express 20 gauge and had issues being able to cycle the action. For whatever reason, he had to like beat it against the floor in order to be able to get the action to open. Now, he was telling me that it had something to do with the spring. I have trouble imagining where in this system a spring would cause the gun to lock up like that, and I think it's more likely that it was probably some either out of spec portion of like the chamber or perhaps the locking lug, and if not that, then maybe like some burrs or some unfinished surfaces that were just grinding against each other so tightly that they weren't necessarily allowing the gun to open. I don't know, I'm not a gunsmith. I really didn't inspect the gun that closely, and it would have done me any good to have done so because, again, not a gunsmith. So regardless, Remington was having issues with even their simple pump action shotguns, the flagships of their line, which is unfortunate in this case. And you could really tell that it was the death knell of Remington and the Freedom Arms Group when in 2020, during COVID, we had the biggest boom in firearms purchasing. Millions of first-time gun owners, millions of firearms purchased, and Remington lost money during that time period. In a period where guns were flying off the shelves, where you were having difficulty finding anything that you actually wanted, it was Remingtons that were getting left behind, which is kind of insane to me. The Freedom Arms Group would wind up seeing its way out. Bushmaster would close down and would come back reincarnated as Wyndham Weaponry. Marlin would be purchased by Ruger and has been on the mend ever since. And now Remington is like Rem Arms or Remco or so, I don't know. I don't understand how businesses work. I don't know how you can just be like, oh, Remington Arms is defunct. We are now Remco. Not the same, but the same, absolutely. With that, the Remington Express would also go away, being replaced by the Fieldmaster, which is now the utility version of this shotgun. Now, just like the Fieldmaster, you can get this in either wood stocks or synthetic stocks, and a couple of different like finishes, camo patterns, some limited edition stuff, so on and so forth. All right, guys, that pretty much covers background. Why don't we go ahead and get into the features of this particular shotgun? Right off the bat, we have a 26-inch barrel. I'm a huge fan of a 26-inch barrel on a shotgun. I know I have like quite a few like 28-inch shotguns, but I really like the balance of this shotgun with this particular barrel. And we'll talk about that more once we get to the stock as well as shooting. But so 26-inch barrel. We have a singular bead up here at the front which I prefer for any type of wing gun because I like to remain threat focused or target focused and all that kind of stuff, and this helps me for wing style shooting. You'll see that we have a vent rib on top. This is actually really interesting because when you talk about like older shotguns, you only see vent ribs on like trap and skeet. So like we talked a lot about like the Winchester 1200, the Remington Model 31, both of which previously reviewed on the channel, links in the description. The field versions of those guns did not have vent ribs or solid ribs or whatever it was that was popular at the time. But Remington went ahead and put that on this gun, even though this is technically more of a hunting shotgun. It's kind of who this is kind of prioritized towards. Generally, in a hunting type situation, you're not going to shoot your gun enough in order to be able to actually get the barrel hot enough that you need the heat dissipation that a vent rib gives you. However, if you go to the trap line, because you're preparing for hunting season, you might get this gun warm enough that you will have some heat dispersion from the barrel being warm. So they added a vent rib. It works. It does good stuff. In addition to that, you have the option that if you wanted to get into trap or skeet shooting, you could take this shotgun and do so. So it makes a lot of things more accessible to the budget-minded, to the everyday man. All right, now we do have interchangeable choke tubes, which again, when we're talking about older shotguns, if you're in a pawn shop and you're sitting there and you're looking at a Remington 870 Express, used obviously, and something like a Winchester 1200 or whatever it is that it may be, you might be kind of faltering between these two options of like, well, both of these guns are used, but like, well, this Winchester seems a little bit cheaper, but you won't have the interchangeable choke tubes. Now, I don't know why it took so long for interchangeable choke tubes to be a thing. I would have thought that this is something that everybody would have caught on to as a utility option like super early on. Fixed chokes don't really make sense to me unless, and maybe this is something I need to dive deeper into when it comes to research, but I think our grandfathers were not that worried about trying to optimize our shot pattern for a given distance or use as much as they're like, well, I'm going to hunt this particular animal and I'm going to need full choke for that. So I'm just going to have full choke barrel and just figure it out from there. So I guess that could be how it is that came about. It's neither here nor there, and maybe something I just need to do a little bit more individual research on to begin with. All right, now we do have a quick removable barrel feature, which is very common with modern shotguns. But again, if you're standing in a pawn shop looking at a Sears Model 20, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description, and this, or excuse me, a JC Higgins Model 20, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description, and this, you're not going to be able to swap out barrels. So you're not going to be able to pop on a slug barrel or something along those lines in order to be able to get more utility out of this particular shotgun. You'll see here we have wood. It's not the greatest wood in the world, but as far as like grain or anything like that is concerned, but it's better than the wood that you get on modern Mossberg 500s, because that stuff looks like it is cheap wood. We have some checkering here on the handguard, which I really appreciate, and it actually looks very nice. Again, for a budget gun, I feel like this is well adorned. Now we also have these kind of cutouts here in order to be able to funnel your hand, and I really appreciate that because I feel like I have a very solid grip on the gun to be able to like cycle and all that kind of stuff. And speaking of cycling, the gun cycles relatively smoothly. I don't want to move it around too much because it'll cause the microphone to freak out, but very difficult to keep in screen here. Our magazine tube is 4 rounds with the possibility to be able to extend the capacity. You can add like additional tubes and all that kind of stuff in order to up the capacity on this particular gun if you chose to do so. Just like you could turn this into a tactical model if you wanted, buy an 18-inch barrel, pop it on here, and then add an extended magazine tube. Something I will point out about barrels for these guns though, barrels for shotguns almost cost as much as the gun. So if you can find a combo deal, that's pretty sweet. Now we do have dual action bars, which when this gun came out in 1950 was becoming the standard. And this is a reliability feature. A single action bar, you could potentially torque the action in such a manner that you could induce malfunctions. You won't get that with the dual action bars. Now this is actually a 870 Express Super Magnum, which means that it is chambered for up to 3.5-inch shells. Now I am not the biggest fan of 3.5-inch shells. We'll talk about that more once we get into shooting, but you have that option if that is something that you desire. And generally, the big difference here is going to be that your Super Mag is going to have a slightly longer receiver than what you would commonly associate with some of the shorter or older shotguns that only ran like 2 3/4 or perhaps 3-inch shells. Slightly longer receiver in order to be able to accommodate that 3.5-inch shell. Also a slightly longer bolt and a slightly longer action like length of action that you have to, you know, bring that bolt to the rear and all those types of things. Because as it turns out, when you make things longer, everything gets longer. Who knew? All right, so our finish is a simple matte finish, and this is probably one of the biggest departures between this and the Remington 870 Wingmaster. The Wingmaster has a lovely blued finish and, you know, nice, well glossed, good grain wood and all that kind of stuff. This is very simple, and I'll tell you that the finish is very durable. I've owned this gun for decades, and while you can definitely see evidence of where it has had some wear and tear and all those types of things, be it dings out in the field or, you know, a little bit of safe wear, the finish is holding up exceedingly well. I have no rust. This has definitely been in all elements and traveled all around the country with me, and it has held up fantastically. It's a very good shotgun. Very good finish. All right, why don't we go ahead and get into our bits and pieces, our manual of arms. So our slide release is located in front of the trigger guard in order to be able to empty the gun, cycle the action initially, all those types of things. Longtime viewers of the channel know that I do like having things on the front of the trigger guard. However, our safety is to the rear of the trigger guard, and longtime viewers of the channel know that I dislike having a safety to the rear of the trigger guard. It puts my wrist in a really uncomfortable position in order to be able to stay on top of that safety. I would much rather have my safety in the front of the trigger guard and my slide release closer to the rear, because I want my finger in a very natural position to be able to come back onto the trigger to you know, deactivate my safety and come on, instead of like this weird kind of slither over type of deal here. Now, I will also note that our trigger guard and like lower section here are made of plastic, which is not something that you'll have on a Wingmaster. All right, we have our buttstock with a semi-pistol grip. Long-time viewers of the channel know I'm a big fan of the semi-pistol grip to really be able to like pull that gun into my shoulder. We have some decent checkering here. Big fan. Definitely like seeing that. And then we have a rubber butt pad. This rubber butt pad does fine, though if I were to make a habit of shooting 3.5-inch shells out of this gun, I would want like a limb saver or something along those lines. I actually keep a limb saver in my range bag for stuff like this. All right, guys, that's features. How does it shoot? Guys, I've been shooting this gun for decades, literally since I was a kid. And I can tell you that this action is exceedingly smooth. Recoil can be stout once you start getting into the 3-inch shells and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what comes with the territory with the pump action shotgun. You don't have a semi-auto to help bleed off some of that recoil with the gas, the mechanical system, whatever it is that is operating off of, inertia, blah, blah, blah. So like this definitely gets stout once you start getting into the heavier loads. But I've shot 2 3/4-inch buckshot, 3-inch buckshot, 2 3/4-inch slugs, probably some 3-inch slugs as well, bird shot, turkey shot. This has actually been a turkey shotgun for me in the past. And I can tell you that for those very limited series of engagements, those very limited round count engagements that I've been in with this shotgun, the 3-inch shell doesn't bother me that much. Now, when it comes to the trap line, which I don't have any trap shooting footage right now because I don't really do a lot of trap shooting anymore, this shotgun has been one of the most steadfast and reliable shotguns for me. The balance with this length of stock is actually fairly handy. You guys know that I prefer a little bit shorter length of stock, and then when we combine that with this 26-inch barrel, this gun is very lively in my hands. Even though it's not a light gun by any means, it is quick to my shoulder. It's very easy for me to be able to track targets. So like when I was a kid and I'd have trouble like on the trap line, I was just having an off day, didn't seem to be able to connect with anything. This and my Winchester Model 1200 and 20 gauge were the guns that could always bring that spark back. So I have a affinity for this shotgun for sure. Reliability, I mean, it's Remington 870. It is as reliable as you would expect it to be, especially because it's pre a lot of the issues that Remington had with their production line and their quality control and all those types of things. All right, guys, that's shooting. What are my recommendations when it comes to this particular shotgun? Would I recommend this for duty type use? In this configuration, no. But if you drop this down to an 18 or 20 inch barrel, added a magazine extension, side saddle, shell carrier, or, you know, like shell cards or something like that, yes, absolutely, I would recommend this for duty type use. One of the things to keep in mind, though, this being a little bit older model, I don't have the ability to be able to mount optics on this particular gun. So I would have to get either some sort of add-on to be able to mount optics or just not run optics. Now, optics on shotguns is definitely a hot topic, especially when we're talking about like tactical shotguns. A lot of people will tell you that like, oh, well, just, you know, keep it simple and it'll be fine. You know, you don't need optics, but optics are especially when we're talking about like a tactical type situation, if you're a police officer or whatever, optics are a force multiplier. So I don't particularly like to deny myself options, and an optic gives me a lot of options. All right, well, what about home defense, self-defense? In this type of arrangement, you could do home defense. I wouldn't make this my truck gun or anything like that, but you could do home defense as long as you were committed to the idea that you're just covering a doorway. If you have family members that you have to go secure, I would not recommend this setup for that purpose. However, if you had an 18 or 20 inch barrel, even a 22 inch barrel, you would be able to pop that on there, and then this would be just fine in home defense, though still not my first choice if I had to go secure family members, because it's very long. Like, you're stuck at 18 inches at a minimum if you don't want to make this an NFA item. If you want to make this an NFA item, you can drop this down to 14 inches, have you a little entry gun, and it would be a little bit better at like pine corners and stuff like that, but this is not, I like much shorter setups whenever it comes to having to do CQB in a house, depending on the layout of the house. You might have fairly open areas to be able to work in, and this may not necessarily cause you an issue, but eventually you're going to run into a doorway, and that's going to be a problem. So, of course, just like with the duty type thing, you could optimize this for those purposes. You just kind of have to make the decision on what it is that's going to be beneficial for you in this case. Okay, so from there, would I recommend this for hunting? Absolutely. Waterfowl, pheasants, squirrels, rabbits, ducks. I think I said waterfowl already, so I guess I probably don't have to delineate between ducks and geese or any of those types of things. Deer, bear. You can configure this gun in order for it to be relevant for your purposes. There are plenty of options out there, and you can pop on whatever barrel and all that kind of stuff. Especially if you're going to go after deer, like in this case, you could either get a slug gun or a slug barrel that has iron sights on it, or you get a slug barrel that has a cantilever mount that comes over top of the receiver to allow you to be able to mount a scope, to be able to increase your engagement, surety, distance, ethical shooting, and all that kind of stuff. So yes, absolutely would recommend this for that purpose. That is what this gun is built for. This is meant to be a one-stop shop for what a man might need. Given his circumstances, situation, you can definitely configure this accordingly. Okay, well, what about his competition gun? Now there, I might be a little bit more careful, primarily because this is very utilitarian for like a dedicated competition gun. But if you were just like, you know what, I think I want to try out like trap competition, and this is what I have lying around, do it. That's great. You have your foot in the door and you have a good shotgun to be able to do that with. Now, this may not be where you want to live long term, but also if you're not necessarily trying to be competitive as much as you're just trying to get out, have fun, go shoot some skeet and do like the really loud version of golf, then yes, this would get you into the game. Just don't necessarily expect it to be like perfect at it. All right, well, what about as a woods gun? Well, I wouldn't go hiking with it. This wouldn't be a bad option if appropriately configured. Like this configuration, I wouldn't use it as a backup gun on like a guided hunt, but this would be a good option if appropriately configured to be a backup gun. You could do that if you wanted to. It's a very utilitarian gun, you know, strong, sturdy construction, all that kind of stuff. You could throw it across some sort of, you know, farm vehicle, you know, ATV, UTV, whatever, and have this available should you need to handle some sort of varmint while you're out working around your property, be it of the 2 or 4-legged variety. You could have this gun ready to go for that type of purpose. In this arrangement, this looks more like, oh, hey, I'm going to be out and about and I might want to take some pot shots at doves. Oh, well, you know, I'm out and about and I just flushed, wow, I just forgot like every bird's name. I just flushed a pheasant or whatever, so I'm going to go see if I can flush him again and get him this time around. Or, you know, I know there's some rabbits been hanging out over here, so I'm going to be doing some work over there. Bring this out. Anyway, you get the point. Yes, it could work in certain circumstances. It would not necessarily be like a do-all in this configuration. You have to change some things, and that's okay. All right, Murph, what are your uses for this particular shotgun? Well, right now, not a whole lot. I don't really shoot trap anymore. I don't hunt upland game. This is more kind of one of those footnotes from my period in my life when I did do those types of things. So I have no real intentions of, I mean, I guess I could buy like an 18-inch barrel or a 20-inch barrel and start like optimizing this for more defensive type purposes. I hadn't really thought about it, if I'm completely honest. Now I kind of am. But for the moment, at least, it's going to remain in this configuration and just be kind of a footnote in my own personal museum that is my firearms collection. All right, well, what about some competitive offerings, Murph? What can we buy that would be very similar to this? Now, of course, if you're trying to get something new, it's going to have to be the Remington Fieldmaster. But if you're looking at, you know, you're trying to get into shooting or hunting on a budget, you might look at some guns that would have been competitive with this at the time period that have probably depreciated in a similar manner. So when we're talking about trying to go after 3.5-inch shells in a pump action shotgun, I start off with the Mossberg Model 535, which is the 3.5-inch chambered Mossberg. I don't care for the wood on newer Mossbergs, so I would definitely go synthetic stock if you're going to go that route, because I just consider that wood to be useless. It's disgusting. It offends me. I don't like it. I had an older Mossberg 500 that actually had decent wood on it, but it was pretty old. Something that a little pawn shop find that I came across that I could pick up for fairly cheap because I was looking for a cheap shotgun to be able to defend myself and my home. You might also consider the Benelli Supernova. Now, I'm not a big fan of the Nova, let alone the Supernova. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was looking at buying a Nova, and something that I noticed was that the action was very rattly. And I didn't really like that. I also seem to remember that the Nova at one point was having some failures of the safety system that was causing the firearm to discharge. Now, I haven't heard about that in years, so I'm sure they fixed it. Just something to take into consideration. So those would be the competitive offerings in this case. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting. That's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.